And don't get me started on Tulsi Gabbard. Okay. Okay. That person, another junior colonel who got promoted by putting herself politically into psychological operations, okay, who was dissing the United States left and right at every opportunity she had. To put her in as director of national intelligence, I'm not concerned about what she's not going to tell Trump. I'm concerned about what a person who I already know abuses the truth and facts, who has no character and no competence, what she will do with our intelligence for herself.
Welcome back to another episode of Just the Facts with me, the Watergate girl, Jill Wine-Banks, and today's special guest, a friend of mine, Malcolm Nance. I'm very excited to have you join us, Malcolm. Welcome.
Well, I'm always glad.
As everyone who is watching us now knows, of course, you are a frequent MSNBC commentator and have a very interesting background. And so I think everybody probably knows it, but just to make sure, you are a prolific author, which people may not always know about. And I mean prolific. I mean, I wrote one book and I know how much effort it took. So you've written so many, too many to name, but everybody should go and Google your books. And some of them we will talk about because they're clearly relevant to today. You're a former U.S. Navy Senior Chief Petty Officer, and you specialized in naval cryptology. And you also, after 20 years of service, retired in 2002, and 20 years later, you volunteered to serve in Ukraine. And so I definitely want to talk about what you did there and about Ukraine, but also I've heard you commenting on Syria recently. And so everyone's going to want to know about that. Plus, I did something different this time. I actually announced that you were my guest in advance and asked if anybody had questions they wanted me to ask you. And they did. And so I'm going to ask you some of those questions. So let's start with Ukraine, because of course it's quite unusual for someone who's retired 20 years to then gear up. And I mean, the pictures of you in full combat gear, quite impressive. Tell me about what motivated you, what you saw while you were there, whether you're still in contact with anyone in Ukraine so that you could give us any predictions on how the fighting is going to go and whether there is any possibility of some ceasefire, some settlement, whether North Koreans joining the fight on behalf of Russia is a game changer. That was one of the questions that came from one of the followers that I have on Blue Sky. And I loved the questions I got from them. So I'm going to do it for future episodes too. But
Good.
Can you talk about Ukraine, please, Malcolm?
Sure. Well, first, most people know me that I was a contributor at MSNBC for 7 years as the counterterrorism and intelligence, contributor. But when I went to Ukraine before the war, not as part of MSNBC, but as part of the think tank, doing a study, a flash study of the Russian order of battle. And the question on the table was quite simple. Did they have enough forces there? Were they actually going to invade Ukraine? And so I went to Ukraine in January of 2022 with the intent to do that. And the first thing that anybody who's ever been on the ground in a war knows, or at least an invasion, and I've taken part in a couple of major invasions, you need to know the path of aggression, so to speak. Where exactly are these forces going to originate? What are the highways they would need to go down? What are the main supply routes they would need to take? What are the major villages or roadways they would have to seize in order to meet their objectives? And so to meet those objectives, I drove all over Ukraine, all over the east, from the north in the ways that they would come down from Chernobyl, through, Chernihiv, which is in the northeast, Sumy out in the east, from, the routes that lead from Kharkiv. And, Ukraine had already been at war since 2014. So it was, a very small sliver of the country was actually occupied, Donetsk and Luhansk provinces and Crimea.
Right.
But Russia was now going for the whole tomato. And as I mapped out the order of battle on these maps, you could see where the units were originating, where they were actually operating out of, Belarus. It became very, very clear to me very quickly this was not a drill. The Russians were absolutely going to invade. And the key that really got me going was the fact that something that I had learned in the first Gulf War in the run up to Saddam Hussein's invasion, the ammunition that was flowing was massive. You do not move ammunition for a drill. You move ammunition because you're going to move it one way and you're going to expend it and then you get some more, right? So it became really clear that the war was going to happen. About 10 days before the invasion, I was invited to go on a junket to meet the commanders of the Ukrainian army at the battlefront in Avdiivka, which is the forward edge of the battle area, a direct line in Donetsk province, right there near Donetsk city. We ended up 70 meters from the Russian Donetsk People Republic positions who opened fire on, the little observation post that we were at, and that's 210 feet. And that's where the war started, from that 210 feet. And we were there with the commander of the Ukrainian Joint Operations Area, General Pavliuk, who is now the commander of the Ukrainian land warfare. And we also met at the time General Sersky, who was the commander of land warfare, equivalent of the commander of the army, who is now the chairman of the Joint Chiefs, so to speak. He is the
Mm-hmm.
commander of the entire Ukrainian armed forces. And when we were briefed by them, the journalists who were there were all like, "What are you going to do when the Russians come?" And I could see that these guys were not the kind of people who were going to fail in their mission in defending Ukraine. And at one point, the comments were just so inane. And I, like, what if they come from the south? He goes, I'll fight them. What if they come from the north? I'll fight them. And I was like, these guys can't be beat. You can just look in their eyes and tell this is going to be a fight.
But
And
let's
actually,
fast forward,
yeah,
Malcolm, to, you know, it's years now that this has been going on, and
yeah,
the Ukrainians have been unbelievable in combating superior size forces,
right,
but not well motivated.
right.
And I'm just wondering now, today, how do you see this going?
Well,
Is Ukraine losing ground? Is the North Korean presence a sign of weakness of Russia?
right.
Or does it mean that Ukraine is in more danger because there are these people there?
Mhm.
What is your prediction for, we're just a week away from the new
Sure.
year. What do you think is going to happen in
Well,
2025?
let me rewind right back to 2022 when I decided to join the International Legion. They needed experience, and I had intelligence experience, I had ground warfare experience in the Middle East, but it was nothing when we got out to the Eastern Battlefront in Kharkiv. That this is World War II. This is I used to joke, it's not World War I trenches, it's the Ardennes Forest in 1944
Wow.
with the German army, the equivalent artillery going in each direction. It is
Can
a
I
full scale war.
Let me interrupt you for a second, because you're Navy, and I think of
Yeah.
Navy as ships and water.
Yeah.
I worked for the Pentagon, for the
Yeah.
Army. We're the ground. We're the Ardennes Forest. So how did you get that experience on the
Yeah, the
ground?
wherewithal. Well, I'm a black guy that speaks Arabic. So, as a sand sailor, as we say, I spent far more
Uh,
time ashore with Middle Eastern armies and, in Middle East land warfare than I did in naval warfare, even though I'd been involved in a couple of naval engagements. Took part in the land invasion of Kuwait and had to deal with Arab allies. So, by the time I got to Ukraine, I had a lot of land warfare experience, a lot.
okay.
Iraq, Afghanistan, all the rest. So that fast forward. I joined the Legion because I saw Ukraine was a country worth fighting. They
Yeah.
were the eastern wall of democracy. And that first year, I spent a year almost in the Ukrainian army. I learned that this was an adaptive, intelligent thinking force led by those two generals I told you about earlier.
Yeah.
They slaughtered the Russians in the first year. Let's just be honest. The Russians were devastated. I went through the Javelin anti-tank missile school to learn how to be a javelin gunner.
Ah,
And the guys who were there training had already killed, 20, 30 tanks. I mean, Ukraine could not be beat. So fast forward now, it took a stalemate in around 2023, but Russia only advances by the meter or the kilometer at the most. Ukraine pushed them out of 80% of the land that they took in the initial invasion. So where does that leave us now? Well, that the operation that Ukraine took by invading Russia and going into Kursk province was a brilliant move that I personally thought they should have done 2 years earlier to redirect the resources of the Russian army off the battlefront. Ukraine is actually conducting maneuver warfare up there, like we trained in Europe to fight the Soviet Union. But they're doing it on their terms at their pace, and they are like how can I put it? They're like a tree shredder eating the Russian forces, and the Russians throw bodies in there, and they come out mulch at the
mm,
back, and that's what's happening to the North Koreans. This is a force with no experience who, as soon as they got to, Bulgorod and Kursk, the first thing that they learned about was internet pornography on their mobile phones. And they were sent at the Ukrainians en masse in this, crossing the Yalu River type mass attacks. And the Ukrainians gave them the treatment, which is advanced American and European technology, guts and determination, and soldiers who already had up to 3 years combat experience mowing North Koreans down. There's a video of a stack of 25 of their bodies
mm.
laying in the snow. So, North Korea is only just absorbing Ukrainian bullets. That's all they're doing for Russia.
I may have to issue a trigger warning before we
Yeah,
post
sorry
this
about that.
video. Um, this is really, I'm sure it's accurate, but it is very graphic and
It
vivid.
is.
So I think I will
Yeah,
warn the audience that before they listen to this, they should be prepared for, um, in some ways, good news, but graphic news.
yeah.
And I don't know if you know this, but I took a year off of law school and worked for the Assembly of Captive European Nations, which
Mm,
I did not know at the time, but in writing my memoir, The Watergate Girl, learned was a CIA front. It was composed of the leaders of the former Soviet nations well, not the former, the then overtaken nations: Poland, Hungary, Czechoslovakia, Ukraine, etc., Lithuania. And they were fighting communism and the Russian takeover and seeking
mm,
independence. So I have a long stake in the independence of all of the Eastern Bloc countries. And I also, when I worked for Motorola, worked in Ukraine and Russia. So I do have a pretty informed sense of Putin and what's going on, and also the role of NATO and the EU. And I'm wondering if what's happening now and what you're predicting for 2025 will impact the EU, will impact NATO, will impact America, because I don't think Americans often realize something you said earlier, which is that Ukraine is a bulwark of democracy
mhm,
on the border with Russia. And I personally think that if Russia succeeds in reforming a part of the Soviet Union, the USSR, by taking Ukraine, which I'm taking heart from what you're saying, they will not succeed in doing, but that if they should, that's not the end. They're going to go for several other countries that they used to control and that are now independent. So, can you talk about how
mm.
this impacts NATO? And that was, by the way, a question from a uh, follower on Blue Sky as well.
Good. Good question. First off, Ukraine is fighting a war for its own national existence. I just want to caution people as to the realities of what's happening on the ground, because if you were to listen to U.S. media, because of the daily attacks that are going on, you would think that Ukraine is almost completely overrun. Donald Trump himself was making inane comments that all of the cities of Ukraine are destroyed. He had some
Mm.
Dresden in World War II image of Ukraine. It takes 18 hours at 70 miles per hour to drive across Ukraine. That's the distance from New York to Tampa. If that's the case, then the war is technically only being fought in the last 30 to 45 minutes of that drive, and along a very narrow strip from
Yeah.
Kharkiv down
Yeah.
to Kherson, and Odessa. Most of the actual things that you're seeing are just missiles flying over cities and one or two and debris getting through. So Russia has fired thousands of cruise missiles and rockets and ballistic missiles at Ukraine. And but if you go to Ivano-Frankivsk out in the west, or the Uzhgorod in Carpathia, or anywhere, even downtown Kiev today, you will not see the war. What you will see is maybe at night some loud noises when the cruise missiles fly 3 to 4 hours to come hit a power plant and get shot down. So the
Mm.
country, 99% of that country is not at war. They are a burgeoning democracy. They have an industry. They now have a war footing.
So, Malcolm, let's move from uh, Russia, Ukraine, uh, and go to Syria before we get to Panama.
Hmm.
And you have been commenting on Syria. So tell me what you're thinking right now. I think some of your comments were much closer to the takeover of the government, to the ouster of the
Mhm.
dictator, Assad. What do you think the future of Syria is going to be militarily and also in terms of government?
Well, let's hope that the Hayat Tahrir al-Sham, which is the organization, the HTS, which was Turkish
Mm-hmm.
backed, Saudi backed, formerly Islamic extremist type group, which solidified themselves and many other small groups into a more moderate conventional fighting force. Let's hope that their leader Jolani lives up to his word. He says he does not want this Syria to be sectarian. There's some things that many people don't realize about Syria. I carried out operations in and or around Syria, including airstrikes, when Hafez al-Assad was Bashir al-Assad's father was in power. And then Bashir al-Assad took over as the younger, more cosmopolitan,
Okay.
more acceptable dictator until the 2011 uprising, the Arab Spring kicked off, and then he became, all the resources of mass murder of his father fell into his hands, and he used them, including over 250, I believe, applications of chemical weapons. And I remember when the first chemical weapon attack went, and I made my opinion very well known to people I knew in the Obama administration, that the red line should have been very simple: destroy the Syrian Air Force and change the balance of power amongst the conventional forces in the Middle East. And it would have saved me, and a lot of people in my community, a lot of intelligence collection trouble. So that being said, now that Assad has collapsed, to the east we have the Kurdish forces, U.S.-backed Kurdish forces. To the center and most of the west, we have the HTS, and then we have the people who were formerly in power, the Alawites, the Christians, some of the Druze. Druze are mainly in the south, who were in Assad's government and who were dominating the Sunni Muslim majority nation with the assistance of Shia Muslim Iran, Hezbollah in Lebanon, Shia militias that came from Iraq. It was mass hysteria. Now it's gone. The world has completely changed. Israel no longer has any of the confrontation states of 1948 as its enemy anymore. They're all gone. Syria, Libya, Iraq, Saudi Arabia, Jordan, Lebanon, they're all gone. Iran has been pushed back to its physical borders, of only being able to do activities from Iran and from Yemen. And it ain't gonna last very much longer from Yemen, because now they have the
Mm.
Israel's Eye of Sauron on them. That being said,
What is Eye
if
of Sauron?
oh, from Lord of the Rings, right? The big,
Oh,
the giant eye that can see all.
sorry, thought it was a new military thing.
It's a terminology for you do not want to be seen. So this happening has changed the whole structure of the Middle East. Iran's 48-year operation to surround Israel with this crescent of Shia groups has just collapsed. As of yesterday, the prime minister of Iraq, al-Sudani, came to an agreement with Shia Muslim militias in Iraq that they will no longer carry out attacks on Israel. What does that tell you? I mean, so Iran and Yemen are all that's left.
Wow.
Hezbollah has been decimated. So if the HTS form a unity government, and it was smart business, bringing the former prime minister up, the one who was on the outs with Assad, and allowing him to represent the minorities and to maintain stability, get the dates and baklava being sold in the souk, the Hamadiyya souk in Damascus, and get the country back on a solid, basic economic footing, and limit the reprisals and mass murders that I saw when Iraq fell. Okay, I literally was in circumstances where,
Mm.
neighbors were carrying out revenge attack against their neighbors because one guy was Shia, one guy was Sunni, and worked for the police, and were like gunning each other's families down, in the street. If the HTS can gain control of that, get economic input. Germany is one of the first countries that says that they want to support them because 1 million Syrian refugees came to Germany.
Mm.
And they all want to go, many of them, most of them want to go back now with their know how, their money, and their relationships. That could really stabilize Syria. So I think a
Interesting.
great opportunity is happening here.
And all right, let's leave on a positive note from
Yeah.
Syria
Yeah.
and the Middle East. And um, very few people know when I was General Counsel of the Army, that includes being General Counsel of the Panama Canal Corporation. So I read with great interest the post on Truth Social by Donald Trump, obviously not written by Donald Trump because there's no inappropriate all cap letters. There's actual punctuation, sentences, paragraphs. So he didn't write it, but it came out under his name
Hmm.
saying, Carter Treaty, horrible. We have to take back the Panama Canal. Now, first of all, I just want to set some ground rules here, which is we never owned the Panama Canal. We got
Right.
a 100-year lease in 1903 under Teddy Roosevelt in exchange for building the canal, which was quite an amazing feat. The Army
Hmm.
Corps of Engineers led the effort. It was an amazing accomplishment for any country to be able to do that. In exchange, we had a 100-year lease and control of the canal, not Panama, just the canal for that 100 years. It was about to expire. And in order to keep any rights to it, the Carter administration entered into negotiations that would return the canal control to Panama, as it was going to happen under the existing treaty, but got some valuable things like Navy ships would get priority should they ever need
Right.
to go through the canal. Highly valuable. I think you would agree as a naval officer that it's an important route, and it was important. So, I mean, I could ask you what the military could do to take it over, but since it would be completely unlawful, it would be an invasion. What do you think's going on there? What's his
Well,
interest in Panama? Why is he doing this? And who's behind it?
I think there are two people behind this. First off, I can tell you who wrote the email: Vladimir Putin. And all he did was change the words Crimea
Oh
for
my
about
gosh.
Panama Canal Zone, and you'd be pretty darn close to some of the rhetoric that was used in the run up to
Interesting.
2013. If I see next week pro-American protests breaking out in Panama City, and around the canal zone that's being funded by billionaires, we'll know where this is going.
Uh,
Also, I wonder if he's, I wrote the book, The Plot to Destroy Democracy,
right.
where Putin was using his intelligence agencies' money and influence to create not communist, right? Like he was an ex-KGB, a pure
Right.
communist officer for most of his career, but an axis of autocrats. And that is aligning clearly
Mm,
around the world. Xi, Kim Jong Un, the Iranians to a certain extent, Erdogan in Turkey, Sisi in Egypt,
yeah.
and that they were funding like crazy these nationalist groups in France, and
Yeah.
and Germany, and
Yeah.
Switzerland, and Austria, and Greece. It's now congealing with the re-election of Trump. And Trump is using terminology and phrases, power playing phraseology, where he's flexing a bizarre reverse Monroe doctrine. Somebody clearly went up to him with drinks in their hands and said, and trust me, I'm a chief petty officer, senior enlisted, so I know when drunk officers are talking. And this guy said, how are you letting the Chinese take over the Panama Canal?
God, you've
And
you've
in the
you've said
same
so many
breath,
things that I have to follow up on. When you say drunk officers, of course, the first thing that comes to my mind is, I bet you guessed, Pete Hegseth.
oh my God,
And
even worse.
so, I mean, we'll get to
We'll get
his
the
Trump's.
drunk company grade officers.
Yeah, no, I just want to get to some of Trump's cabinet picks, including him, and how horrible I think that would be.
But one more point.
But I also want to say, you said the Monroe Doctrine, and I think the best line I've seen on social media was George Conway saying, "It's not the Monroe Doctrine reverse; it's the moron doctrine." And
Moron doctrine.
yes, so I think
But
that's
at the
pretty much
same,
captures it.
but Jill, at the same drunk conversation, someone clearly who had been drinking talked about global warming now opening up the pathways for a faster shipping route north of Greenland through the Arctic Circle,
Oh my
which
God.
most of which is controlled by Canada, and the other one is controlled by Denmark. And all of these have all miraculously popped up in Donald Trump's tweets in the first week. So whatever they're drinking out there is clearly gotten to Mar-a-Lago, and he's now playing Risk, okay, on a global board with ridiculous ideas. Don't worry, we'll be going to the gold standard here soon and getting rid of the dollar.
Well, of course, there are all the memes of Narca-Lago, and also there are a lot of tweets. I don't even use that word anymore. There are a lot of blue sky postings um, about it being related to some kind of tax problem that he has,
Yes.
and I can't find any real substantive evidence. So I don't know. Do you have any intelligence on whether there's a tax problem in Panama
Yeah,
that's
actually,
causing this?
it was very well known about 5 years ago, when the great global purge of Trump's name off of buildings and structures.
Hmm.
He had a resort in Panama that was licensed name, and the Trump Corporation did not pay their taxes, as he doesn't do. He just
Right.
doesn't do it, and they seized the property. And there's a video of them triumphantly ripping his name down. I'm sure that plays into it at all. The man is a transactional person, and he has long grievances. But really, I think it's easier to account for, a drunk former admiral or general talking about taking over the trade routes through Antarctic and the Panama Canal, and it'll make us more powerful than China. And he
Uh,
just thinks that this is something he can just do by fiat.
so, all right, let's talk about Pete Hegseth, and
Oh, do we have
let's
to?
talk about Tulsa Gabbard,
What?
because I mean, your background's in intelligence, and I mean, to me, these are two very dangerous people. Neither having the qualifications to run an organization the size of these organizations. Hegseth has financial mismanagement allegations that caused him to be fired from two veterans organizations. So just on that, it's a problem. His sexual assault allegations, and then his comments about women in combat. That is very troubling to me. When I was general counsel, uh, the Army was in the process of uh, opening basic training to women, eliminating the Women's Army Corps so that women became part
Mhm.
of the regular Army and therefore eligible to hold positions as generals in many capacities that they would not have been able to as members of the Women's Army Corps. Um, I saw women in combat. They have succeeded admirably. And frankly, the Army can't survive without the women who are part
Absolutely.
of it. So that, to me, disqualifies him. Tulsi Gabbard, uh, I don't know that she's a Russian asset. I certainly know that she supported Assad when no other member of Congress would. And that's concerning. And as DNI, she would be controlling the information the president gets. And to the extent that he pays attention to any of the intelligence information he gets, he wouldn't be getting a full picture under her. So, what's the best way to stop these nominations? Are the Republicans going to stand up as they did to Gates?
Hmm.
And by the way, of course, today the Gates report came out, and I'm sure I haven't read the whole thing yet. I've just seen the headlines about paying for sex, statutory rape, which means sex with minors, alcohol. All of those things are headlines depending on which paper you read. Not good. But he's gone. What about
Yeah.
these others?
Well, the first thing is the best way to approach Tulsi Gabbard and Pete Hegseth is simple: outrage. Outrage. We are just not outraged enough. I
Mm,
think that people are trying to be civil, and this is no time to be civil. I'm a senior enlisted, okay? I know when it's time to have a blade handed, one way conversation with my organization to say, what's going on here is wrong, and you have an obligation to stop it. And then work your way up and down the chain of command. Now, I can slap my way down the chain of command, but when it comes to junior and, we're talking about a man who was not even a mid grade, he
yeah,
was a company
yeah,
grade
yeah.
infantry officer who has no, I would like to
I
see
know. He was
his
a major, right?
inventory,
Yeah, he was a
a
major.
major in the
Yeah,
National Guard, not
yeah,
even line army. So
yeah.
I would like to see all of his inventory reports on the end of deployment before I can see anything. Because if he's lost 2 or 3 night visions, multiply that by
Nah,
10,000, and what we have. Another thing, for all the talk that people say about, your character, it was General Norman Schwarzkopf in his speech to the West Point cadets who made one of the greatest speeches. I'm Navy and I know this speech, okay? About a leader, a true leader, the MacArthurs out there, the people who actually are war fighters who lead this country's men and women in the armed forces have two major factors that make them stand out. One is character, and the other is competence.
nah,
Pete Hegseth has neither
yeah,
character nor competence, which means everyone below him is going to look up and go, that man's a moron. Okay? Someone may actually say it. All right? I would if I was in the halls of the Pentagon. Just being there because someone has put you there does not give you leadership or
right,
respect. He drinks. Let me tell you, when I was in Ukraine, not one drop of alcohol came near my lips if I was anywhere within 100 kilometers of the battlefront. That was 10 months of not doing that. These people he had a bar in his office at Fox News, which means he enjoyed
yeah,
it. He enjoyed entertaining, but he lied about all of it. He lied about sexual assaults with women. His character went right out the window. He
yeah.
he shouldn't be allowed anywhere near there. And don't get me started on Tulsi Gabbard.
Okay, I
Okay?
will. Go ahead.
Okay, that person, another junior colonel who got promoted by putting herself politically into psychological operations, okay, who was dissing the United States left and right at every opportunity she had, to put her in as director of national intelligence. I'm not concerned about what she's not going to tell Trump. I'm concerned about what a person who I already know abuses the truth and facts, who has no character and no competence, what she will do with our intelligence for herself. Okay. I
Hmm.
was a collector for 20 years. Okay. That means my information at times went straight from my mouth or my keyboard to the National Command Authority. And what it said was what it was. And I don't need somebody to take it, use it, manipulate it, withhold it, use it for their own personal ends or nefarious ends. Okay? The intelligence community are, I call them dedicated men and women, people you wouldn't notice twice at the Walmart, who dedicated their entire lives so that the truth should be known and that American citizens will be protected based on that information, as well as our assets, as well as our sources and and the technology that we have. I can't believe for 1 second she won't compromise like Edward Snowden multi-billion-dollar programs out of her mouth but through a blithe comment because she thinks it would benefit President Trump. So she shouldn't be anywhere near the name Director of National Intelligence, much less being considered for the job. God save us.
Okay, so we've mentioned one of your books. Are you working on any new book? Because you seem to write them like every year.
Well, there's been a little gap since my last one, but my next book coming out is actually my memoir, uh, which is the main title is Thinker, Sailor, Black Man, Spy. And
Oh,
the
great title!
yeah,
Is it Macmillan Holt Hatchett? Who's
it's Saint Martin's,
okay? Because
and
we
it's
shared a publisher for a while there.
oh yeah, we were at Hatchet, I think, at the same
Yeah.
time. But it's interestingly enough, in the 248 years of the United States, and in which we have run intelligence operations, there has never been a personal memoir of a person, an African American in the intelligence community, that
Hmm.
has been publicized on a large, or that has ever been publicized. A lot of biographies, even Ralph Baruch, who was who helped find the United Nations,
Yeah. Yeah.
helped create Israel. He was an officer of the OSS in the Africa division in World War II. Never really mentions it. I don't even think he
Wow.
mentions it in his bio, in his autobiography.
Well, I
So we
will
have
look.
great intelligence professionals, many who've preceded me in this career field, but they hadn't put it to pen. The memoir is now in its seventh, going on eighth month of review by the three principal intelligence agencies, principally the National Security Agency, who was my primary agency that I worked for. But it's going to be a book that, let me tell you, I call it the anti-Snowden memoir because I loved the people I worked with. I was proud of the
Yeah.
people that I worked with and the missions I was allowed to be involved with, and it will drive minority recruiting, I hope, when it comes out, because these are good people with good hearts. I have a great chapter called the little old ladies who destroyed Iran, and it was literally this one division where there were some, you know, people who had been at the fort for 40, 50 years. And these are the people that save our lives and lives of American citizens every day. And I want to honor them with this book.
Well, thank you for your service and thank you for this book. I will look forward to having you on to talk about it when it's published. Thank you so much for joining me today, and Merry Christmas in just 2 days.
Yeah. Well, Merry Christmas to all of your listeners, and let's look forward to the preservation of our Constitution.